Tobias Harris, and Tobias drills it! Sixers up one!
Embiid fakes, Embiid down the
What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap Podcast, back for a bonus episode this week. My name is Sean Bernard, as always, and I'm here with a special guest today. I got Jared Zero, who is half of the Dunks and Donuts podcast, a guy who I had a little back and forth with on Twitter regarding the status of Derrick White that I made sure we wanted to dig a little deeper in. So before we dive fully into it, Jared, talk to me a little bit about what all you got going on. I know the Dunks and Donuts podcast and everything else you're rolling with.
Yeah, for sure. First off, I want to say thank you for having me. And you're right, we did have that little bit of back and forth, but to talk about myself, so like you said, I am one half of the Dunks and Donuts podcast. So my co-host her name is Ryan. Her ad is Miss Ryan Bakes on Twitter. She owns her own online bakery. Fantastic, all vegan pastries. Wow. It's delicious. So that's how we came up with the name. It was a little bit of a play on what she does, my passion for basketball, her passion for the Celtics, and the show is centered around the whole Celtics community, the community service the players participate in, the Twitter community, even just the behind the scenes community of people who work within the organization. And honestly, we've had some really awesome guests. I know we're going to talk about him, but Derrick White's dad was one of our guests on the show. Richard White was awesome. We had the new play-by-play kid for NBC Sports Boston. His name is Drew Carter. He was awesome. We've had so many awesome guests so far, and it's pretty new. So, that's about what I got going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool to hear, and make sure everybody checks that out. That I was impressed when kind of digging in and checking out a little bit of your backstory, all the stuff that you guys got going on. So it's a very cool stuff. And to kind of set the stage for how we get here today, I do want to bring up the initial tweet that kind of sparked things. So share my screen now. And this started with shout out to Josh Reynolds, friend of the program, has been on a couple times, but he tweeted out, "Remember when that one Celtics dude said Derrick White was better than Tyrese Maxey, LMAO," which I do remember vividly. That was not you, Jared, for clarity, but there was somebody that was going around on quite the rant saying that. But I commented under Derrick or under Josh's tweet and just said, Derrick White went from one of my favorite players to watch to one of the most overrated players in the NBA very, very rapidly. He's awesome for what he is, but stop trying to make him more than that. To which point Jared replied, "Can we debate this on your show? Because overrated is definitely not a descriptor I would use." So I took Jared up on this offer, and here we are today discussing things. So to throw it to you right off the bat, I will say I like Derrick White. I think he's a winning player. I think he's a guy that I like having on teams. But I do think that the perception of him is far better than what it is in actuality. That I think there is a lot of buzz going on for this guy who I would not consider a top 25 guard in the NBA and kind of is a fringe top 100 player, in my opinion. So, Jared, I'll throw it to you off the bat. What is your response to that?
So you actually kicked it off with what I was going to start with, is the whole top 100 argument, right? Mm-hmm. There's no way that anybody who covers the NBA, who focuses on basketball as much as people like us, should ever leave him off of a top 100 list. And to be fair, I don't even think he should be left off of a top 50 list. Wow. Derrick White's impact for what he does goes so much beyond his box scores, right? Sure. I mean, he's a guard who has more blocks on the season than Giannis Antetokounmpo, Bam Adebayo. I mean, these guys are defensive player of the year candidates year in and year out, and Derrick White has more blocks than them. He has more defensive impact than some of these guys in certain positions, right? So it's like you can take his box scores. I mean, I have everything pulled up right here. Just for the year, in 32 minutes per game, he's averaging 15, 4, and 5 on 60% true shooting, right? And like I said, it goes so much beyond that. Yeah. Derrick brings an energy to the game that most people can't beg out of their top 3 players on their team. So to leave him out of a top 100 is just asinine to me. And that goes back to my original comment where it's like, he might not be your favorite player. You might not think he's an all-star. That's fine. But to say he's overrated is just not something that he is. Like, he is underrated, I think, by a lot of people who do consistently leave him out of these types of conversations.
So I'll ask you this then. Should he have been an all-star?
I think there's a case for it. I mean, look, I love Scotty Barnes. I think he's great. I don't know if he should have been an all-star over Derrick White. You know what I mean? And going to Josh's post, I'm not going to sit here and say Derrick is better than Tyrese Maxey. I love Maxey so much. He's great. He's a fun player to watch. I mean, his growth this season alone, averaging 25, 3, and 6, has been nothing short of incredible. And I think he has a case for most improved. But I think if Derrick White was averaging Tyrese Maxey minutes, you know, maybe there's a case that he has similar stats.
Interesting.
Right? So I do think Derrick White had a case to be an all-star. And obviously, being from Boston, I'm biased. I do think he should have been an all-star. But to take it, my bias away from it, there is definitely a case that should have been made, because what the all-star games have turned into, and what even really MVP voting has turned into, is box score watching, right? No one cares about the nuances of the game anymore, where players are impacting the game that doesn't show up. You know, this obviously they track steals, but passes deflected, right? Like stuff like that, or just locking players up to the point where they have to pass out into a bad shot. It's just these little things that Derrick White does, I think, should give him a case for that all-star campaign.
Interesting. And that's kind of where my overrated conversation creeps in, is I don't believe he's an all-star. I don't believe he's in that conversation. I know I'll frustrate Raptors fans here as well. I think Scotty Barnes is closer to the Derrick White archetype of player than he is to kind of the Jayson Tatum or Jaylen Brown or a 1A, 1B on a team. In my mind, I think the best version of Scotty Barnes is in a more reduced role than he currently has. And he is a guy that I think can impact winning in a similar way, but I don't think he's a guy that you should be going to create your own shots. So I'm not going to go head to head on the Scotty Barnes take there. He's not a guy that I kind of had in the same conversation. And for what it's worth, Derrick White, you kind of mentioned the stats. So his 15.4 points per game, that's tied for a career high in him. The 5.2 assists is a career high. 4.3 rebounds is a career high. The 1.0 steals tied for career high, and 1.3 blocks is also a career high. So he's having a terrific year. There's no doubt about it. He's very necessary to what that Celtics team does. But that's kind of where my conversation with a lot of these Celtics takes. And I do want to dig in on the Jayson Tatum MVP campaign in a little bit, but I want to stick with Derrick White for now. Is that roster's loaded. There's no doubt about it. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I think it makes it easier. That you brought up the case of if Derrick White was playing Tyrese Maxey minutes, I think that we would be far more critical of Derrick White if that was the case. That it's a way easier lane to run in when you have the third tier, oftentimes fourth tier expectations. When we talk about what Kristaps Porzingis brings to this team, who's been phenomenal this year, by the way, and a guy that I haven't seen get as much love as I think he deserves. But I did want to list off a couple guards here. These are all guys that I think are notably better than Derrick White. I want to see if you have an issue with any of these. So let me rip down this list before I throw it back to you. We'll start off. I'm throwing Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I know they're not traditional guards, but I think for this conversation, they kind of fit. So Tatum, Brown, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic, Devin Booker, Steph Curry, Anthony Edwards, Damian Lillard, Donovan Mitchell, Tyrese Halliburton, Trae Young, Cade Cunningham, Jimmy Butler, Jalen Williams, James Harden, De'Aaron Fox, Ja Morant, Tyrese Maxey, DeMar DeRozan, Kobe White, Jalen Green, DeJounte Murray, LaMelo Ball, CJ McCollum, and I'll stop the list there for now. Do you have an issue with any of those names?
There's a handful I have an issue with, and Bucks fans are going to hate me for this, but Derrick White this year has been better than Dame has been. I don't care what anybody says. Let's face it. I mean, the Bucks traded away their entire identity, fired their coach just to get Damian Lillard, and he has not impacted winning for them the way that Derrick White as a fourth option is impacting winning for the Celtics. And we've seen it in the games that Derrick White's missed for Boston, right? Obviously the top so the list you had, like you said, not traditional guards, Tatum and Brown, obviously. There's Shea, there's Luka. Obviously, these guys are above him. But when you start getting closer down towards J-Dub, stuff like that, the argument kind of flips to like, okay, are they in the same role? Like, do they contribute the same, right? Like, that's where my issue is. And this is the issue that I have with not even just Derrick White, but other comparisons. It's like, first of all, these players are not playing in the same role. They do not play the same number of minutes. They don't do the same things. So it's hard to compare. But again, so when I take Derrick White, for example, and I'm looking at what he does, right? 32 minutes per game, he has career highs and everything, and that's as a fourth option on, like you said, an incredibly stacked Celtics team. And I'll be the first to admit this is probably a super team, right? Like everybody's saying it. So if you're to take him and put him in a number one role where he's getting more minutes, he's getting more touches, obviously he's going to perform better, or at least that's the trajectory that he's on, right? So that's why it's so hard to sit here and say like he's under or he's overrated, because we're seeing him average career highs as a fourth option on one of arguably the most stacked teams in recent history. And that to me is mighty impressive, because from the top down, Jayson, Jalen, Porzingis, Drew are all averaging less than their career highs.
True.
Where Derrick is averaging career highs in almost every statistical category. That's really impressive to me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's why, again, like, to say he's not an all-star or to argue against that, I understand that, right? Because this league, for anybody listening, we are in good hands for the future of this league. There are a lot of talented young players. But so I'll accept he might not be an all-star argument. And again, my bias, I think he is. I think his impact goes so much beyond the box score. But to just the overrated thing, I just won't stand for, just because, he's constantly doing things that also inspire hope in Celtics fans. And obviously, I know you're a Sixers guy. But looking at the series with the Miami Heat, right? Celtics are down 3-0. We come back 3-2, game 6, 0.2 seconds left, and he has that insane putback. It's like
wild. That was a crazy
right.
play. Yeah.
And those are the type of things that Derrick does night in and night out, where if you're not consistently watching the Celtics, I understand why you'd kind of get that perception. But as somebody who watches every game twice, at least, right? I'm seeing all these little pieces of where his basketball IQ is just so high. He knows where to be at the right time. And it's just, like I said, his impact is just so much deeper than the box score, which is why it's hard for me to agree with an overrated statement, especially when, major news outlets like ESPN are leaving him off of top 100 lists.
Yeah, and I think that's fair to pick a bone with for sure. And for all these conversations, I always feel a little bit bad that like my fight is never against that player specifically. I still like Derrick White. It's way more about how he's talked about, the discussions he's in, where he's ranked by media members and by the public. That this is way more of like a me versus them kind of pushback. And right. I think from both sides, people kind of come over the top for the hot takes to take the extra step. I am a Derrick White guy that I like him. He's been a fan favorite of mine. But to kind of bring this conversation, so Derrick White's 29 years old. Tyrese Maxey's 23 years old. I think Tyrese Maxey right now is the better basketball player, and I don't think there will be a single day for either of the rest of their careers that will change. I think Maxey's on this upward trajectory to a point which Derrick White cannot match. I think Maxey has developed at a defensive rate that he has not received the credit for, that I would consider him a plus defender at this point, which was a significant weakness in his game in the past few years. So I've had to ask you to rank Tyrese Maxey and Derrick White. Who you throwing at number one?
If I had to put them together, like if I had to rank just one and then the other, I'm obviously going to put Maxey over White to an extent, right? But I'm going to take it back to a different argument I had on Twitter about 2 months ago. Somebody, I forget who, we were talking about Bam Adebayo versus Kristaps Porzingis. And they're like, well, Bam is better. Bam is the better big than Porzingis. And I'm like, sure, on paper, he might be. He might have better stats. But Porzingis is better for this team.
Absolutely.
And again, I said it earlier, I'll say it again. I love Maxey. I think he's great. I think Derrick White is better for this Celtics team than Maxey would be. And that's because we're seeing it in real time. Embiid's out injured. Maxey is demanding a lot of the touches a lot of the time. And it's instilling that confidence. Whereas if you were to swap them, right, and you were to put Derrick White on the Sixers and you were to put Maxey on the Celtics, Maxey's not going to have as big of an impact as he does on the 76ers. And Derrick White, I think you see the ball spread out a little bit more. I think you see more people get involved than you do currently with the build of the 76ers without Embiid.
That's interesting. I would agree with pretty much all that there, that I think that's a fair outlook for it. But kind of in this like stacked conversation of how good the Celtics are, still a storyline kind of buzzing around. And I think it's toned down a little bit after you had a kind of a tough stretch of games there. But the Jayson Tatum MVP conversation. So normally I'm pretty much pro the team with the best record, the best player on it. That's a great case for an MVP right there. I do think Jayson Tatum's a little different because of all these reasons that we're talking about, that it's not a fault of Jayson's, but there's nights where he's just not the best player on the court from the Celtics perspective, and he doesn't have to be, and they still produce wins as a result. When I compare those to guys like the true Nikola Jokic or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, when those guys play bad, their team loses, and that's, to me, what a most valuable player is. So do you believe Jayson Tatum belongs in the MVP conversation, or do you think it's gotten a little overblown?
I definitely think he belongs in the conversation. To your point, the best player on the best team should always have a case for it.
Sure.
But the funny thing to me is, like, we say he had a rough stretch of games, right? Realistically, it was 1.5 bad games. He had a bad half against the Cavs, and then he had a bad game against the Nuggets. And then he just started rattling off 29 points, 30 points per game for an 11-game stretch after that. And it was just like, he's not playing bad. He had one bad game realistically, and everybody, from what I noticed, is because the Celtics are so good this year, and even in the past few years, right? It's so easy to just whisper their achievements but scream their failures. So when Tatum does come up short in those games, because it's so not often, people will just like talk about it like it's the only thing that matters. So Tatum should definitely have a case, but to your point, Jokic definitely leaps and bounds by far should be the MVP this year. I think he's the best player in the world. I genuinely believe he's the best player in the world. Shai, he should also have an argument, right? To your point, when he's not playing well, the Thunder lose. Mm-hmm. But the Thunder, he's also led them to the number 1 seed in the West. So it's like he should have an argument there. To your vein, though, I wanted to touch upon this, and I'm glad we shifted to the MVP combo, is that Luka Doncic. Mm-hmm. I can't say I love Luka because, similar to you, I don't like what people have propped him up to be.
That's fair. Luka
is an incredible talent, and he is one of the best talents we've seen in a long time in the NBA. But his play style does not translate to winning. And people are acting like he's had this insane career with all these accolades, and they're saying he's a top 3 all-time player, this, that, and the third. That's wild. I'm like, Luka he's great. He's an offensive guru, but he can't play defense, and he hasn't won anything. So for him, if you're, and again, going back to our earlier conversation, if you box score watch, he could have an MVP case. But I think it's really, to your point, guys who impact winning should have those cases.
Yeah, and the Luka Doncic conversation, it's interesting that for him, I think for me, I'll speak to, and I think a lot of people, what sticks in my brain with Luka is he has been a playoff riser. He has been a guy that's played his best ball in the biggest moments, and that series against the Suns, in which they absolutely destroyed them in Game 7, blew them out by 30, 40 points, whatever that one ended up at, is absolutely one that sticks with me. And I know there is kind of that Devin Booker to Luka Doncic rivalry that I think is cool to watch. Luka specifically, I think it's something that I don't know how you maximize that style of play, that you essentially just have to be very good at it if you're Luka and the surrounding players. We're talking about Jalen Brunson is excellent and was pretty much perfect in his role there. Kyrie Irving's played very well this year, and the pieces around him, the Reggie Bullocks, the Tim Hardaway Jr.'s, the guys they rotate in, even the guys they brought in this year, the Daniel Gafford, Derrick Lively's been terrific. But it's actually maximizing that player, you're more or less dying with how good they have to be. And I agree with you. That's a stylistic issue, that how much you're just riding on his shoulders.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought up Jalen Brunson, because one of the biggest arguments around Luka, he's never had help. He's never had this. He's never had that. He has Kyrie Irving. He had Jalen Brunson. He had Kristaps Porzingis. People can argue, Porzingis was injured while he was with the Mavs. Sure. But look at him healthy in Boston. Look at what he did with Washington, even. He was the number 2 option in Washington, and they weren't a bad team. He was playing really well. So it's there's just so many excuses around Luka. To your point, he is a playoff riser if he can get there.
Sure.
That's the big what if around him. But to go back to your main question about Tatum and his MVP campaign, I do think there's an argument to be made. If he won it, would I be surprised? No. I think there's a solid case. But again, on the flip side, if he lost and Jokic won it, Shea won it, I still would not be surprised. I think those three guys, at least in my opinion, should be far and few away from the rest of the league when it comes to the MVP convo.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you there. I would throw Giannis slightly in there. I'm not a Giannis guy in general. He's a guy that stylistically I'm not a fan of, that I don't really enjoy watching his game basically whatsoever. But I can't deny the numbers that he puts up, the way that I do respect the competitive level that he plays with and how he does bring it every single night, because you don't see that from a lot of these guys. So I would probably throw him in kind of the 4-man range there, but I definitely am not banging the table saying he deserves it. To me, this is a war between Jokic and Shea. My personal choice would be Shea, but my honest expectation is that Jokic. I've been an anti-Jokic guy from the Embiid versus Jokic days. I got to kind of tip my cap and wear the L for that one, but kind of is what it is at this point. But for the Celtics, to kind of shift back to that, so Tatum, I think, also kind of falls a little bit on my list of players that I don't love stylistically, that I'm not denying the talent or how good he is. In my opinion, he's a surefire top 8 NBA player, and I think you can make the argument that he's a little higher on this list than the bottom. So I'm not denying the talent, but I think like his shot diet is something that bothers me, that it's a lot of living and dying with the tough step backs. And when he's hot, he's hot. When he's not, he's not. I think he has grown as a playmaker. He has grown. He's a good defender, a guy that rebounds the ball well. His rebounding numbers are impressive this year and have been throughout his career. But like, do you think, for your criticism of Luka, some of that kind of applies to Tatum in the way that he kind of takes his shots down the stretch?
No. No.
Okay.
To be very just direct with it. So funnily enough, I was looking into this yesterday, believe it or not. Tatum on his pull-up threes and those step backs, right now, since the All-Star break, he's shooting right around 55% on them, which is a lot higher than I think people expect initially.
Very high, yeah.
But someone did a whole breakdown, and it was like if he takes a certain amount of dribbles, it's higher or lower. And on straight pull-ups, 0 dribbles, it was like 67% or something ridiculous like that. And then 1 to 3 dribbles was in the 50 range. 4 to like 6 was like below 40. And then 7 or more was like mid 40s. So I'm not mad at a lot of the shots Tatum takes. And to narrow it down even further, if we're to go into like crunch time, like games tied, Celtics are down 1, Tatum, at least earlier in the season, I haven't checked this, so forgive me if my numbers are wrong now, but earlier in the season, he was shooting about 49 to 50% on those like game winners, like end of game shots.
Which is good. Very good, by the way.
Right. And people are like, he always misses the last shot. He always does this. Porzingis should take the last shot, which I'm not going to disagree with, but there's really nothing that concerns me about Tatum's shot selection, especially knowing the team inside and out the way that I do, what they kind of how they talk to each other. And you can hear it in the press conferences. I mean, there's been plenty of times where it's like he has a poor shooting night. So it's like, well, the team just keeps telling me to keep shooting. They want me to be confident. And I can live with that, right? Because, you know, you lack that confidence, you stop shooting. Eventually that's going to translate to the next game and the next game, and that's going to carry over for a month. Now you're on like a super cold streak, whereas like, yeah, you have one bad game, you go 2 for 10 from 3, whatever. But the next game you go 7 of 9. Like, that's the one thing I like about this team, is that they're always instilling confidence in each other. And I think overall his shot selection has been pretty good.
Okay, interesting. I think that's mostly fair. For the Celtics as a whole, they've been the best team in the NBA all year by a significant margin. Is it championship or bust this year?
Yes and no. So this is a fun conversation I like to have. And actually, you're the first person who's asked me it on a podcast where I don't have a character limit on Twitter. So to an extent, yes, it is championship or bust. Anything less than a finals appearance, I think, is a failure this year. And I'm going to knock on wood. I do think they are good enough to make it. But it depends how the finals goes, in my opinion. We get swept, not great.
Mm-hmm.
it goes 7 and we lose to a team like Denver, I can live with that. Denver has the experience. This is our first year, this roster playing together. Obviously, there might be some hiccups. Now, so that's where like the kind of is for me. It's like if it goes 7 with a team like Denver, they have championship experience, they have the best player in the world, and it's not like a complete blowout every single game. And it's like game 6, game 7 is like super close. Like I can live with that. Run it back next year. I think that experience will feed into it. And then assuming all of this is barring any major injury, right? Like someone gets injured, obviously it's going to be a lot more difficult. But to that point, I also think the Celtics do have a relatively deep bench, all things considered, because of the questions at the beginning of the year. So, championship or bust, no. Finals appearance, yes. That would be my answer for that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good outlook there. I personally think the Celtics have taken more heat than they've deserved for not making it as far as they have in the playoffs. That frankly, I think that team has had far more success than pretty much everybody, but maybe 3 or 4 teams across the NBA. Obviously, the ones that have won championships in recent years. But they're very good. Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown are a duo that I think should stick together, even with the critiques of the overlap. And that noise has definitely been louder in past years than this season, and rightfully so. So I enjoy seeing the pressure on Boston from the Philadelphia side of things. But frankly, I think it's more than they've earned at this point. I don't think that is a core that they should mess up. And frankly, I think there's longevity to it. They should keep trying things, making it work, and see what happens there. But I do think that the expectation should be for them to win the East this year. And to talk about the Sixers a little bit, is there any fear whatsoever in the Sixers team? Joel Embiid, obviously no set date for when he'll return, but he's been out the past 7 weeks at this point. He was having a historic season prior to that, and I'm disappointed that we didn't get to see how it fully ended up. What are your thoughts on the Sixers team for this year specifically?
Yeah, so I'm actually glad you asked that. I was just talking about this on a different show a couple nights ago. I do like the Sixers team. I think once you guys got rid of James Harden, everything kind of came together more cohesively. My biggest problem with the Sixers is I don't think Embiid should come back this year.
Interesting.
And I'll talk about that shortly. But I was saying, like, if we get paired up with you guys in the first round, I can see it going 5-6 games. Am I scared? No. But I do think Tyrese Maxey is good enough, Kelly Oubre are good enough to have those really big games. And I can't even call them outliers, right? Because they both step up pretty consistently for you guys. Mm-hmm. So I do expect them to at least have 1 or 2 big games. And, and I think they can steal a game from Boston in a 7-game series. Without Embiid, it's going to be a lot more difficult. But, yeah, I do think Maxey, Oubre, and kind of the supporting cast that they have around them right now is good enough. The problem, and I see it a lot with a lot of my mutuals who are Sixers fans, is Tobias Harris.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough, man.
Like, are you going to get a 30% shooting night for him or a 60% shooting night? Like, he's been so hot and cold this year that it's really hard to gauge how well he's going to do. And, I think that's where, like, kind of the thorn in the side for the 76ers is currently.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that side. And like we talk about what a great fit a guy like Derrick White is, who's the 3rd or 4th option for that Celtics team. Tobias Harris, who's supposed to be looked at as that for the Sixers team, has been brutal this year. And we've been through the Tobias Harris roller coaster, his 5th season with the team. And he's playing the worst basketball that I've ever seen him play this year. And I can't wrap my mind around why. I don't understand. And it, like, for the most part, I think I've been a little defensive of Toby, that he's seen his role go up and down more so than just about any player from a year-to-year basis, where there's times where he's the secondary option on the Sixers team. There's the times where he's essentially a catch-and-shoot three-point guy in the corner. But this year, for whatever reason, it feels like something like mentally broke in him, that his decisions-making has been worse. The shooting has not been good. He hasn't really found a stride. And I don't think that returns for the remainder of the year. So I'm very much concerned with that as well. But what is your reasoning behind why Joel should not come back, would you say?
So, again, and I mentioned this to you before we started recording, and I'll say it for everybody to hear. I'm a Celtics fan who likes Joel Embiid. I don't like his foul baiting, but he was taught that a lot in his training and, breaking into the NBA because he's such a large dude. He is, very big. So they teach him like foul bait because it's easier on your knees. It's easier on the legs. And I think even without that, he's still a top player in the NBA, top 3, one of the best players in the league without that. However, he has injury history. His knees aren't the best. The injury that he has right now, the meniscus tear. Mm-hmm. I had a similar injury, I want to say 2 summers ago. I did not need surgery for mine. All I needed was physical therapy, and it still took 3 months before I could even start thinking about getting back onto the basketball court. So where there's 2 different forms of the surgery they can do.
Right.
There's the quick one that you can have a quicker return, or there's the long-term one. If I remember reading it correctly, I'm pretty sure they went with the first option. They went with the quicker return.
Yeah.
If he's to come back and get hurt again, it could genuinely mean the end of his career. And I would hate to see that, not only for the Sixers, but for him, for the fans, for the league in general. It's just not something that's worth the risk. To the point where, like, if the 76ers were in the mix for the 2 or the 3 seed, and you could kind of like visualize a deep playoff run with him, maybe it's worth it. But where you guys are in the play-in right now, and there's, I can't speak for 76ers fan. I don't know what the vibe is on your guys' end, but from what I see, and leaving bias aside, I don't necessarily see a deep playoff run from the Sixers. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think it's worth bringing Embiid back to try to force something and potentially risk his future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that would agree with you and have that similar outlook, even on the Philadelphia side of things. I was extremely frustrated with the Sixers organization for their management of his knee early on in this year, that this meniscus issue was not something that was that one and done fall by Jonathan Kuminga and the meniscus tear. This was something that he was fighting through for several weeks beforehand, and that was essentially the last straw. So I was very frustrated back then that he was playing through this type of thing, because that to me was extremely irresponsible and led to the point where we're currently at. And I am with you that the injury history is concerning, that these are things that I think it's the Sixers' responsibility to be the adult in the room and shut this guy down when he needs to be shut down. For the other side of things is, from all expectations, and they've kept things pretty guarded as far as what information they're making public with this, but it's expected to be a 6 to 8 week recovery. At this point, we're over the 7 week margin. We still don't have a concrete timeline for when he's coming back. If he's healthy, I'm cool with him playing. And the reason that I say that is, there's a finite number of these playoff runs that we're going to get with Joel Embiid. And we've never seen Joel Embiid at his 100% healthy throughout a playoff run. This year is probably the best chance to get that. And for the Sixers team, it's been ugly lately. I'll be the first one to admit that. But every player on this roster has been brought in to play next to Joel. That everything makes sense when he's here. Like a guy like Buddy Hield is going to look excellent when Joel Embiid is the guy having gravity and opening up the floor for shots for him. A guy like Nico Batum, his strengths as a player is he's a quick catch and shooter. He makes excellent entry passes, and he's a good defender. That's a tailor-made player to play around Joel Embiid. When you take him out of there, it looks pretty limited and pretty rough. So, like, the team is currently constructed, it's tough to talk yourself into it, but I think it makes a ton more sense than if Joel's back. And obviously these are conversations that need to be had with the doctor and the people that are taking a look at the imaging, the recovery, all that. But I think if he's healthy and good to go, you absolutely bring him back, because you never know how many of these you're truly going to get.
No, and that's a fair point. And funnily enough, I can use that same argument on my end. Whereas, like, if they wait and bring him back next season, not only do guys like Buddy Hield and Nico Batum have the experience of playing in the Sixers organization, they have a whole season to work with Embiid. And if Embiid stays healthy next year for a playoff run, I think that would be far more important. Because to your point, you're right. Like, there is only a finite number of playoff runs the Sixers have left with him. I don't know if it's going to be because he retires or if it's because he asks out, whatever it might be, or, God forbid, a season-ending injury. I would hate to see that. I hate seeing injuries, any player, any team, any time of the year. It sucks. It's, it's part of the sport, but it's not great. It's not a great feeling. Like, you want everybody to be healthy. You want to see any sport really at its best product when everybody is healthy. And so, like I said, my big concern is that even if they say he's fully healthy, he might not be fully healthy. And I think it'll be very telling if he does come back in the first game maybe the second game, if you can really tell,
Yeah.
And I would just hate to see a career like his cut short due to injury because they want to force something. But I respect the take, right? Like, and again, I agree with it where you do have the limited amount of runs left and you want to see a fully healthy Embiid run. So if you can get it, you take it. It's just you got to make sure he's actually healthy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and that's completely fair. And obviously, hopefully the doctors are all in helping make that decision, even though it hasn't been the cleanest track record from the Sixers end of things on a lot of that stuff. But before we wrap up here, one more question I want to hit you with is you took our guy Jaden Springer at the trade deadline. That was a move that I was not in favor of at the time, still am not. What have been your thoughts on the Jaden Springer experience thus far?
I'm so glad you asked that. Okay, so obviously you're not in Boston, but on NBC Sports Boston, whenever we played the Sixers, Brian Scalabrine would rave about Jaden Springer. And when broadcasters of any team are raving about a player, especially on the opposite team, I tend to gravitate towards them. So I would watch Springer. I've watched his highlights. I've watched him with Philly. That kid has so much damn potential. Yeah. He has so much potential. And to highlight it, I know this player used to annoy Philadelphia fans really bad. He has Marcus Smart potential. And I love Springer. I was so excited when he came here. And we're seeing it slowly, especially where the Celtics have already clinched the East, that they're now resting guys on the top end. They're letting the bench get more run. Jaden Springer had some really good minutes in that Atlanta game, which people are overblowing it. Whatever, we lost. It is what it is. But Springer had some really nice minutes. The biggest thing for him is getting confident in his offense. Once he's confident in his shot and he starts seeing the ball go through the hoop, I think his game's going to completely change. I mean, he's a menace on defense. Yeah. What is he, 21?
I believe so, yeah. He was 18 when he was drafted.
Yeah, so he's 21 years old. He's a complete menace on defense already. And he's to the point where, like, he's learning how to not foul on every defensive possession, which is huge growth, especially from young players. Because that's one rough thing about young defensive-minded players is they foul a lot. Jaden Springer is already starting to break out of that mindset. And I'm just really excited that he's in Boston. I do think he's going to stay here for a while. Sorry. And I think he's going to turn into a Marcus Smart-like player.
Yeah, I think it was a great move by the Celtics, snatching him up for just a second-round pick. Springer right now is an high-level NBA defender. The offense still a little bit of a work in progress. And I've had a chance to interview him a couple times. Great kid, cool personality, a guy that seems to really want it from a basketball perspective, which I always admire and I think is important when you're talking about the growth potential. The Sixers drafted this kid when he was 18 years old with the knowledge that he would be a project. And it's frustrating to me that, like, we just kind of gave up on the project a couple years in when seeing like tangible steps of growth in the areas that you hope to see. So I do think he's ultimately going to be a very good NBA player. And it's going to be unfortunate to see it happen to Celtics jersey. I still don't love the decision that they made that move. I get, like, for this year specifically, that there wasn't much of a role for Jaden Springer and kind of competing with, at that point, Patrick Beverley and now Kyle Lowry and guys like that for minutes. But I think it was the wrong decision to pull the plug on that. And I think the Celtics are going to benefit from it. So I am happy for him. He's getting an opportunity over there. And I do think he's going to be very good in the long run. I want to throw one more player comp at him that you kind of mentioned. You mentioned sure. Marcus Smart, a guy that I see, and I don't think he likely ever reaches quite the level of this guy, but stylistically, I see some Jimmy Butler in his game. And I mean that on both sides of the floor too. The way he gets to his spots offensively, uses his body, uses his physicality. I think that's a name to keep an eye on as kind of a comparison as he continues to grow.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I completely agree with you. And I haven't said anything just because, like, I feel like talking about Jimmy Butler is almost taboo within the Celtics community. But I completely agree. Like, there's some flashes of Jimmy's game with Jaden Springer. And, and just as I said earlier, the league going forward, once Braun retires, once KD retires, once Steph retires, is in such good hands with the level of talent we have from guys like Luka and Tatum in that 25, 26 range and down to the 22, 21 range with guys like Jaden Springer, Jaime Jaquez in Miami. Like, these guys are going to become the faces, and there's just so much talent throughout the entire league. I think, especially where they started saying they want to bring defense back and have it be more physical, I think the product of the NBA is going to become a lot better here really soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you, and I think it is moving in the right direction. But I think this was a good conversation to have, Jared. And before we get off here, anything else you got coming up lately that you want to highlight?
Well, I can't mention any names quite yet, but Dunkin' Donuts does have a couple of really big guests coming on. I don't like to jinx myself, but yeah, so Dunkin' Donuts, we have some really cool stuff coming up. And I know you're not within the Celtics community, but one episode we do have coming is we're doing a pets episode, right? People from all within the Celtics community send photos of their pets, a little blurb about them, and we're going to read them off. And, I think that'll be a lot of fun. So I don't know if you have any pets, but feel free to submit them. I'll do my best to include them. I don't care if they're 76ers pets, but,
Awesome,
but other than that, I just keeping it grinding, and I'm just waiting for the playoffs, right? Like that's where my head is at. I think the 3 to really the 10th seed in the East is just a ridiculous race for every team involved.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see how it finishes.
Yeah, deeper than it's been in years, I feel, which is cool. It's good for the sport that we like that. But appreciate you for hopping on and chatting up with me today, Jared. Make sure everyone is checking out the Dunks and Donuts podcast. I'm going to have to submit a little picture of my 2 dogs here for sure. So appreciate you once again. Make sure you're smashing that like button, hitting subscribe, and we talk with you next time right here on Pick Swap Media.